recognize you for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Can someone at the witness table give your feedback to this committee on the issue of how do we create a better balance when it comes to protecting our federal lands, when it comes to forest fires, et cetera? What kind of relationship should we have between private industry when they have power lines and rights of ways that we've granted to them? So when it comes to the maintenance thereof and or the awareness and the communication between the federal government and the private industry.
Congressman, I think that the key is proper alignment of purpose and alignment of action. And to the extent that the relationships that we need at the local level have alignment and have a proper path to action, I think the parties can successfully do the right thing. When the system is broken, as it appears it is at this point, it's going to require some very strong leadership to create that sense of alignment and that path to action.
Thank you. So, for example, when it comes to the Forest Service and BLM providing clear guidance on and timely approval of vegetation management activities and transmission on the upgrades, how is that happening? How is that happening today, well or not so well? Can you give me some examples of that?
Thank you, Congressman. I can give some examples of where it's working well in the BPA area, particularly for things like rebuilds that we have. If we can get over the hurdle of the discussion about pre-existing rights or not, we actually work very well and do a joint environmental document for the rebuild work that we have, where we get the expertise of the local manager to identify things like wildfire issues and other access concerns, and so we work to jointly do an evaluation, and that can tend to really help make sure that we're on the same page for either the analysis or the types of issues that need to be addressed to protect the communities.
So can anybody give me an example of something that you could recommend, or the feedback process between private industry and the federal government, the agencies, when it comes to how do you communicate with each other and make each other aware of how to create better practices? That's basically what I'm getting at. Is that communication availability strong, or is it something that we have a lot of work to do?
In my opinion, again, it gets back to the individual decision maker that you're working with at a local level. I'll give you, this isn't a West thing, I'll give you a couple examples that I got from Duke Energy. Because once they knew I was testifying, they reached out to us, and because they have an issue in Florida. One was the Ocala National Forest, where they meet with the local decision maker, they go out in the field, they discuss their vegetation management activities that they are going to perform, and that process takes 2 weeks, and they're just going back out and performing vegetation management. The other example was Apalachicola National Forest, where they weren't allowed to cut trees at all until the NERC standard FAC 003 came into play. Then they had to do a EA that cost them $200,000. It took them 2 years to get that approved. And during that time, the Forest Service did a control burn, burnt down their facility pole. It was out of power for it said 6 hours here, and it was a compliance line. It was 230 kV and above.
So on that, so for example, you just gave an example where an agency time element seemed to create an issue, and then an actual event occurred, such as a fire, and then they lost a facility. So again, communication. Did the federal government just say, oops? I mean, was there formal correspondence back and forth on at least admittance of why that happened, and or more and equally important is whether or not anybody was willing to say that they admit that there are better practices and what whether or not they're attempting to do something to arrive at better practices in reality?
I think the communication was there, from my understanding. And the interesting part is the forester I was talking to is, you know, if somebody destroys one of their poles, they bill them. So they built the Forest Service for that pole, and they refused to pay. And on the other side of that, if they were the ignition source and started a fire, the utility is going to pay for it, because that's in their permits.
Yes, go ahead.
Congressman, I can't help but think that it may not expedite the process at all, but if there was an appeals process, someplace that we could turn to have decisions examined, whether or not that they meet a continuity of purpose and policies that are consistent throughout the country. If local land managers knew that their decisions were going to be subject to scrutiny, it might be helpful. Not saying that would always work out in our favor, but at least we could have an appeals process so that decisions may not be so arbitrary as they seem to be from our perspective.
Yeah. Well, I would hope and pray that the appeals process isn't Congress.
I'm not suggesting that, no.
Then only God can help you there. But that's a great point. And again, I think that best practices is something that both government and private industry need to communicate with each other in order for us to arrive at better practices in real life. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
Thank the gentleman for his